So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in. God is good all the time. So today we're talking about the garden season 2025, or at least mostly about what I'm going to do. I'm hoping to answer a few questions as they come in. So I just had a question on lamb's ear and does it die back in the winter? And yes, it does. It is a perennial. It will come back in the spring. So anyway, what I'm going to cover is mostly just like the kind of things that I'll start inside, which will be probably around February, will be when I first get started. And then the things I'll start outside and things I'll start in the greenhouse, and at least one or two new things I plan to try this year. The very first things I start are my tomatoes and my Chinese 5-color peppers. And I always start those in our south facing window in the living room back here, where it's the warmest room in the house. And I can put them right at the south facing window. I'm thinking, actually, I found that starting them with our season, the cold going later and later into the season, I think I found it's best for me to start them in maybe early March or late February. So it might be a while yet before I can start those, but I'm getting excited. I want to get them started right away. And then I might go ahead and start some more arnica seed inside from the seed I collected from my own arnica plants, because I'd really like to grow a lot of arnica. I may even think of planting some out at one or two of our other pieces of property. I'd like to grow a lot because it is one of the most expensive herbs to buy, which is kind of crazy because it self-seeds and grows like crazy in like Montana, especially up in the mountains. So, but it is just so great for many things. I have a video on this, but I mostly use it for breaks and sprains. So combined with comfrey, it is amazing, the two together. I even have used both of them in my muscle and joint rub, which I would also use on a sprain or a break. I do tend to sprain something. Fingers, wrists haven't happened so much since I haven't done martial arts in a while, but I do tend to seem to sprain my ankles or break a toe more than anything. So those two things. And it's just amazing how fast it can heal up a broken toe. It's amazing. So I do it as a soak along with Epsom salts, and nice hot water, as hot as you can stand, and it works great. And echinacea, I'm going to get some more echinacea going. I've been growing echinacea for years, but the germination rate, at least for me, is always really low. And I always seem to lose at least one echinacea plant every year for some reason. And so I like to have plenty of echinacea. And so I'm going to try to get some more started. I don't know if it's our climate or what, because I know some people can grow it like crazy. It is a perennial, it'll keep coming back. But I notice here it's very sensitive. If you accidentally dig it up or you try to dig it up and move it, it doesn't come back. If it's middle of summer and it's growing really good and it gets mowed down too close to the ground, Patrick, it will die and not come back. I've had that happen a couple times there. So it's not always Patrick's fault. And then sometimes it just doesn't, because I have so much stuff growing in my garden and getting bigger every year, that so if it's growing next to perennials like marshmallow that gets just massive, and valerian, then it just struggles. If it's not getting enough light, it just struggles. So I've had to find other places to grow it where it still can get plenty of sun. Then the next thing that happens, so I start those things inside, and then about the time that it's warm enough for me to move those out to the greenhouse and get them out there, because they're growing, they're getting bigger. It's too cold to have them outside, but I want to get them out. So I put them in the greenhouse. So the tomatoes and peppers just stay in the greenhouse because of our cooler, very wet climate. But like other things such as corn, pumpkin, zucchini, basil, those things get started about the same time. And that's usually around April-ish, maybe May, depending on the weather, that stuff gets started in the greenhouse. And then usually with my squash and my pumpkins, any squash, zucchini, a lot of times I'll go ahead and start some outside too. I do both with those because what I find is that some years, the ones I start in the greenhouse do better than the ones I direct seed. And some years it's the opposite. I'll do this with corn as well. So I grow the glass gem corn. And with that said, I still have some Danny corn that was gifted to me years ago. And I keep forgetting I have it. So I think I'm going to try starting both in separate pots, and whichever one does best, because I can't really grow them side by side in my small area because you don't want them cross pollinating. Whichever one does best, at least I'll be able to see how well the Danny corn does. If that does really well for me, then I will hang on to that one and grow that one and probably get rid of my other plants, my other starts, so they're not growing side by side. I mean, I at least can let them grow side by side until before they start to flower. That's where you want to make sure that they're not growing side by side. Oh, the next thing that would happen before starting that other stuff in the greenhouse is then usually end of March or early April, I start my snow peas outside, direct seed, and my potatoes. Now, some people would say, well, snow peas, you can start earlier in the season. Well, I could. Snow peas like cooler climate, but the problem is I've tried it because I know some people will start it in February, but the problem is with here, even though the temperature would be fine for the snow peas, the problem is the great amount of rain we get in the spring. So we get tons of rain from late fall clear through early spring. And what happens with the snow peas is a lot of times they don't survive. They just drown. And same thing with potatoes. It's weird because sometimes potatoes will make it through the whole winter, the ones that stay in the ground. But when I plant fresh potatoes in the ground too early in the season, it's raining so much, they will just drown and I'll have to plant them again. So, and I notice year by year, it kind of changes. And so that's something to keep in mind is like succession planting, because a lot of times you just don't know what your weather's going to do. And so starting some at like maybe what would be normal for you earlier and then some a little later and then some a little later. I do this with beans for certain because I never know with those what's going to happen. Beans are one of the last things I plant and that's usually May and I'll just direct seed those. And yes, you can start corn inside and transplant it. I don't know why people always say you can't do that. You can. In fact, my corn does best when I do that. Does it help the seeds not drown or rot to use raised beds? Possibly, but not necessarily. Not here. If you don't live in an area that gets 120 to 160 inches of annual rainfall, it's really, really difficult to comprehend how much rain that is. Because most people that think they get a lot of rain usually only get 50 to 60 inches, maybe 40. I mean, I think that's common for like the UK. That's about their rainfall. I think their rainfall is very similar to the Seattle area and the Oregon coast. But our rainfall is very different because we live very close to a rain forest. But yeah, I've had things in pots that you would think would be able to be fine, like rosemary, because the pots would allow it to drain. Nope, the heavy rain killed them. So that's why I had to put them in an area where through the winter time, through the heavy rain, they don't collect that much rain. So my rosemary plants, my thyme, a lot of it's right up against the house. And those are the ones that have survived and do very well because the house keeps them a little more insulated, being right close to it, and they're not catching so much rain. And of course, that soil is built up a little higher too. So if it does get some water, it kind of drains out towards the yard that way. So it's one of those things, people, where you got to find what's going to work best for you. And just because the person the next town over the next state over or in your state or county, whatever. Just because this method or whatever works best for them doesn't mean it's going to work best for you. Even your next door neighbor. Even your next door neighbor can have very different soil conditions or other things that they have to deal with. So, just because something works for someone, this is why I get really, really irritated when people come out and they're from all over the world and this is the only way to grow this, that, or the other thing. No, it's not. And then finding the right kind of compost. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on compost. You can, grass clippings do amazingly well for almost everything. They, yes, can be a little more acidic, but it just depends on how you use them. I put them around zucchini, which is a non-acid soil loving plant, but putting it on top of the soil allows it to, and rather than mixing it in, allows it to break down more slowly. It holds in moisture. And yeah, I love using grass clippings. They're free. We'll a lot of times get them from, since we don't have a lot of yard left here to mow, we'll go down to our other piece of property down the road. Lots of grass out there, lots. And Patrick will mow it down and it's all organic. There's nothing, hasn't been sprayed with anything. We'll rake it up, bring it over and just throw it on the garden areas. It's work, but it's free. And I know it's organic. I know it doesn't have a bunch of toxic chemicals in it. Okay, and then the beans, I mentioned the beans in the May. And then if I've started, that's usually when I'll do like the squash seed outside. By that point, I've already started the seed in the greenhouse. And then about the time I'm starting my beans outside, I'll direct seeds the squash. So I'll have both. And then usually move the plants, if it's warm enough, from the greenhouse that have already started, the squash, the zucchini, the pumpkin, and whatever squash I decide to grow that year, I'll then move them out into the main garden and transplant them. So I might put a seedling and then seeds, and then a seedling and then seeds, and then just see which ones do best. I've always done most everything I do here just by experience, because I can't depend on pretty much anything anyone else tells me, because our area is so very unique. Well, everybody's area is unique, but even people who claim this is going to be best for Pacific Northwest. Well, a lot of people don't realize there's parts of the Pacific Northwest, even parts of Washington state, that are like desert. I know because I lived on that side of Washington state. In fact, there's a bigger chunk of Washington state that is very hot and very dry in the summer. It hardly gets any rain. That's the bigger side. But people think of Washington as the wet state. No, it's just a part of Washington. It's the part that's west of the Cascades. And even a lot of those parts are not near, they still don't get the great amount of rain that we get in our little small area. So that's what I'm always saying. There's always going to be a certain uniqueness about your area that you've got to learn to deal with. And so I'm not saying you can't learn from other people or apps or books. I mean, that's great. Have the books, have those things on hand, but just know that you cannot depend on those. If you haven't started gardening yet, you cannot depend on those to be right. Experience is going to be the number one factor when it comes to planting and growing your garden. You're going to try, you're going to fail. You're going to try, you're going to fail. Remember, fail in quotes, because it's not really a failure, because you've learned that plan didn't work, so we'll try another plan. Now I know this isn't the best way. This is why I started doing the do it like planting, the squash, the corn, the zucchini, all that in the greenhouse, and direct seeding, doing both, because I don't know which one's going to work best, because even year by year it changes. So and so so don't be discouraged when those things happen. It's all a learning process. And the thing is sometimes we can become very dependent on what we know has worked for us for 5 years, maybe 10 years. And then all of a sudden you'll get some freak weather that will change everything for that year. And you just can't be discouraged. But yeah, that's another reason why you need to put up as much of your excess as you can. So whatever you're not eating immediately, put it up, because you don't know what's going to happen next year. So, yeah. When is it best to plant yarrow? Yarrow is whenever I'm starting a new herb. So I can only say what works for me. Okay. Whenever I'm starting an herb I've never grown before and know very little about, I always start it in very, very early spring indoors in small pots because I have no idea how well it's going to do outside. I don't know what the starts are going to look like. I tried that before and it was a fail. And even if some of them did come up, I'd be like, I don't know if these are weeds or if it's what I'm trying to grow. I have no idea. So starting things like that in small pots inside gives you a better with clean soil that you know doesn't have other seed in it is a good way to learn what the seedlings are going to look like when they come up so that then when your plants are established and they start making their own plants from the seed that falls, you'll say, "Oh, good, I have more yarrows coming up." Okay, moving on. Oh, a couple other things. I don't know if I'm gonna do both. I might try both. Kind of do the same thing like with the corn. See which one's gonna do well, I'll probably plant them at different times, but that is barley and einkorn. I have einkorn. I have both organic, whole grains that I got from well, the einkorn in specific, I bought their seed pack. It was actually a little cheaper just to buy a little bag of their seeds, and it's actually a lot. And I'm gonna see wheat doesn't typically do well in our area, but I've had wheat just randomly grow from the stuff that I've thrown to the chickens. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I should try it. So I'll plant the barley first because it's typically barley is planted earlier in the season, and then it starts to get its green heads in April. At least I know that's how it is in Israel, but I don't know what that will be like here. So I haven't decided yet when to try to plant it. I'm just gonna guess. I might even consider starting those in the greenhouse as well. And then maybe the month later try or a couple weeks after that plant some einkorn and then see which ones do best for me. I'm just curious to see. And then obviously I couldn't grow enough on this little, for those of you who are new, we do most of our gardening related stuff, chickens and all that, right here on our little shy 1/3 acre lot, corner lot in a neighborhood. But we have another piece of property down the road, and then we have another piece up the mountain. And if I can get that stuff to grow well here, then I'll know. Then what we can do is, if we really need to, if it comes to that, we can till up a large section at one of these other places and then grow our own grains for that. The other thing I'm hoping to do this year is probably going to take out the quince tree. The quince has not been productive enough. The cherries are still taking a while to really put out cherries, and so is the plum out there, but I know the plum can do well. But surprisingly, the quince has just not been happy. I got a couple of really healthy looking quince off it the first year, and ever since it's just pretty much done nothing. And I've decided that I've got rhubarb. I don't need the quince. So I'd rather have pears. And so you got to have 2 pear trees. And I want to do one Asian and one maybe Bartlett type pear here. They're, our local nursery will get in the types of fruit trees that are most likely to do best here. But even then, you're still never really certain if that's going to work. But I would like to have pears. I like pears. Patrick isn't a huge fan of pears, but I really like them, especially Asian pears. And um, pear butter, in my personal opinion, is better than apple butter. I love pear butter. And pear also makes a great vinegar. It's just as, it can get just as strong, nice, good scobies on it, just like apple and peach do. So, no, I haven't tried electroculture, and I'm really not interested, especially again, considering the great amount of rain we get. It's just, I'm not interested in that. There's always some newfangled thing coming out. But again, it comes down to me trying and doing what I know works best. Like, I have followed so many times people's advice for slugs, and, "Oh, this is what it," and the one I get most commonly, to the point that it's like, I'm, like, tired of hearing it is the beer in dishes. I've tried it. I've tried it several different ways. Again, when you live in a place that gets that much rain, you can't just put beer in dishes and expect it to work, because it gets watered down immediately. So I've tried doing it in such ways that the beer would be not catching rainwater. It's still pretty much, I might have got a slug or two. But when you live in an area with this much rain, not only are the slugs very, very tenacious here, there's a massive amount of them. They're everywhere. However, the number one thing that has really been the answer to control our slug population have been my chickens. And no, I don't want ducks. Chickens will eat the small little slugs, especially if you train them young, they will. When I got my very first chickens, I started training them young to eat slugs, and they do. And they especially love the baby slugs and the slug eggs, the larvae. They love all that stuff. And it's changed everything. So the pear trees, the einkorn, and the barley, and then the Danny corn are the four things I'm hoping to do new this year. Now, I just want to share, just so you guys know, the things that I already have. Let me just read off the fruits that we already grow that do really well for us, and that would be our apples, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, but we have blackberries we grow here, but we also have wild blackberries. Two different, we have the wild blackberries, which are the tiny ones that come on first, and then the Himalayans that grow at our other piece of property. Those are the best, both of those. And so we get plenty of blackberries, currants, cherries, plums. I'm probably forgetting something. And then we can also forage for salal huckleberries, thimbleberries, and salmonberries. My least favorite of those being salmonberries. They're pretty, especially when you see the red and the orange together, the red ones and the orange ones. It's pretty. And I've made a jam out of them, mixing them with, they just don't have a ton of flavor. That's why they're not my favorite. But I've made a jam using rhubarb. So it would add flavor. And that was pretty good. It was pretty decent. But we got salmon berries that grow at our other piece of property, but I don't usually do anything with them. Let's see. So we have that. And then for herbs, there's no way I'm going to remember all of the herbs I grow. I wrote some down to help me, but these ones I'm going to list off are, they're all perennial. So we've got, all of my mints, peppermint. I used to have spearmint, but I decided I didn't like it that much. I have chocolate mint, love that one. Very similar to peppermint, just has that hint of chocolate flavor to it. I have mojito mint, but then other types of mints, they're in the mint family. The Lamicae would be the horehound, the oregano, the sage, thyme, lemon balm. I think I already said nettle. I grow nettle here rather than going to forage for it, just to keep things easier and help it to not take so much time. I also grow valerian, which always comes back on its own. Marshmallow. Those were both kind of difficult to start, but once I got them going, I've never needed to plant anymore. It's crazy. I get new plants coming up every year. And so I usually dig them up and give them to someone. Elderberry. I have the elderberry. I could have counted that in the fruit, but I count it as an herb because I use it for medicinal purposes. Obviously, both the berries and the flowers. Borage comes up on its own. I don't transplant that. It is an annual, but it always comes up on its own, though I'm curious to see what will happen this year, because even though it always comes up, the chickens love it. And since they had free range of the garden where it typically comes up everywhere, they ate all the baby plants. So there was nothing to drop new seed. So I'm curious to see if maybe there's still seed in there somewhere that will germinate. If not, I have some seed I can plant. And then I have garlic that it's just always out there. I probably use the greens a lot more. And walking onions. I have yet to harvest any walking onions. I've just been wanting to allow them to grow for a few years and fill up one of the boxes that Patrick made for me out front. And then I'll probably start harvesting them a little at a time and then just let them keep growing. That's what I have written down, but I have so many other herbs I know. Well, like the yarrow. I didn't mention the yarrow. I didn't write down the feverfew. Those are all perennials that come back. Then I have my annuals herbs that I plant, like calendula. Calendula can be a perennial depending on where you plant it and where you live. I've had some come back and do really well if they grew in an area that stayed pretty protected during the winter. But I always start new calendula plants every year, and amaranth. Amaranth is a grain, but I grow it more for the leaves because they're a great, very, very healthy green. They have a nice mild flavor that goes well in salads, stir fries, anything you want to use it in as a green. For those who don't like spinach, they might like amaranth leaves better. Now, I actually already started about how to garden where you're at. I just kind of ended up on that topic because of all the questions people will ask about, well, how do you do it? Well, how you do it is just you start. The best way to learn is just start. So let me share with you a little story about how I started. I had actually it was before we even had kids. Patrick had built a little greenhouse and we were growing tomatoes in there and a few other things. But that greenhouse, it was a Quonset hut style. The plastic didn't cover, whatever it was we used on there. It didn't make it through to another season. So Patrick restructured the whole thing and was going to make a greenhouse. This is out where the playhouse, where I grow my snow peas. And I didn't bring that in here. And the chicken coop all are now. But back then, that would have been the best spot for a greenhouse. And so he built the framework and we were going to invest in some, I think it's like a triple wall plastic. At that time, this was back in like 1991 or something like that. Money was tight and that stuff was expensive and we never got around to it. So then finally, he ended up building a playhouse there because then we had kids and we put in a pool, and then he built a separate greenhouse. That's the one I have now right up against the shop. It's not the best for catching sunlight, but it works. And anyway, and that's been a good place for us. But anyway, that was a start. And then the greenhouse that he built was strictly for growing, up next to the shop. I just grew tomatoes in. I just wanted some good tasting tomatoes, and you can't get them in the local stores. You can get tomatoes, but they always lack flavor. And so once I started growing my own tomatoes, it's like, man, it's hard to have to buy tomatoes anywhere else. So that was the most important thing for me at that time, because I do a lot of tomato-based stuff. All my Italian sauces, whether it be for, homemade pizza, homemade lasagna, homemade ravioli, and the like. Did I say lasagna? That too? Spaghetti. I don't know what I've said already. So I can go through a lot. Then you have the salsa. And I prefer red tomato salsa over green tomatillo salsa or green salsa verde. I've grown tomatillos and they did pretty well here for a couple of years. And then I kind of gave up on them because I decided I really like tomato salsa better than salsa verde. Salsa verde is good. I just like tomato better. Personal choice. I like the color better too. So at any rate, then in whatever year it was, 2012, 2013, I think it might have been 2013, we decided that it's time to, we started really paying attention to what was going on out there, with the food, with the everything. I think it's time we start trying to expand on what we have and do more than just tomatoes. and I had this gap, this space that we were trying to grow raspberries in at the time, just for the sake of having raspberries. Because it's crazy. Raspberries can grow good here in our area, but if you were to buy them in the store, you get a tiny little amount like this, and they're just horribly expensive. The same thing with the blackberries, and blackberries grow wild here, and I think it's crazy they sell them in the store. I think they sell them in the store for all the tourists that come through, and they're just horribly expensive. So growing raspberries here makes sense. But for whatever reason, never could get them to grow really well in that area. They did one year, and then they up and died. And so what we did was we took that area, and all I had at the time, we didn't have a rototiller. I just had a shovel. Didn't have compost. I'm like, I'm just gonna do it. So I just took a shovel and dug up that area between the greenhouse and our deck. And it was a lot of hard work. The soil was very heavy, and pulled all the sod out and just started sticking stuff in the ground to see what would happen. Amazingly enough, some things didn't grow or didn't grow well, but I had a crud load of snow peas. I was reading on the package that the snow peas would only grow to like 4 feet. They kept growing, and they kept growing, and Pat had to keep just kind of throwing something together. It was just kind of a mess just to give them something to keep climbing on, because they ended up like 9 feet tall. And then I also Jerusalem artichokes. I tried them that year, and of course they'll grow on just about anything. And we did them one year. Wasn't crazy enough about them to want to keep growing them. But the snow peas, I learned they did well. I learned that other things did not do so well, just being tossed in the soil without any compost, without any add-ins to it. And yeah, but I learned. So from there on, I just kept trying. I kept trying new things. I kept trying different things. Using wood shavings out of Patrick's shop and whatever, the grass clippings and so on. And just leaves. Those are the things we use as, garden amendments, especially in the fall. Throw all that stuff on there, let it break down through the winter. And that kind of stuff works great for us. And it's cheap. It's free. It's free. If you have chickens, this is why I wouldn't want to use sand in my chicken coop, because the straw, the leaves, the wood shavings, whatever it is I'm throwing in there as a deep litter, I shovel that out. I throw it in the garden beds, especially in the areas where I'm going to grow corn, potatoes, berries, and whatnot. It's got all that chicken poop in there, and it's going to break down, and it's free. So, well, virtually free. I mean, a lot of times we'll buy straw, but sometimes we'll throw grass clippings in there too, as long as they're dry. And just let all that stuff break down and shovel it out, put in some fresh bedding. And yeah, that just works really great. So anyway, let me go back and see if there was any other garden related questions. So besides marigolds, sage, nasturtiums, are there other pest controlling flowers? It really depends on the pest. So if you're talking to things like mammals, like rabbits, deer, and so on, usually anything with a stronger smell, especially a citrusy or minty smell, can be helpful. So your lemon balm, your peppermints. Well, a lot of your bugs don't like those minty things either. The peppermints and the lemon balm and so on. So usually you're pretty safe with anything that has got a citrusy or minty smell or flavor. So there might be lots of mullein all over Washington, but it's not typical on our side of the mountains. So I don't know if North Song is still in here. It took a lot of trial and error for me to get mullein to grow here. And what it actually, the way I was finally able to get it to grow was to get some acclimated seed from a friend who was kind enough to share the seeds from her plant that she had brought over from Eastern Washington, because it grew great over there, because opposite climate, absolutely opposite climate. So, east of the mountain range, you have hot, dry summers. You get 4 seasons in most of those areas. Here you have 1 season, cooler and wet all the time. Well, summer can be warmer. We can sometimes get some really hot days. Really hot days for us are between 80, 90 degrees, which sounds like nothing if you lived like living in Wenatchee, it got hotter over there, but it's drier over there. So over here, when you're used to cold and wet, and then you have the humidity on top of it, when we have those hot days, it can be pretty miserable, but thankfully there's not very many of them. Now, I do have some healthy mullein plants. I was so grateful that those worked out for me. I didn't harvest anything off them this last year. They got their first flowers this last year. Yes, Usnea grows wild here. It grows on our other piece of property. It tends to like our alder trees quite a bit. So if I see any when we're down there in the summertime, I'll harvest what I can. Some of it's up really, really high, and I figure I'll just let it grow. When it gets to a point where I really need it, I'll just throw a ladder up here and the tallest ladder where I can feel safe getting onto and go up there and harvest it. Yeah, sage would grow really well in Eastern Washington, but it grows really well here too, even in our very wet climate. I haven't had to do anything special with it. Anyway, having more than one type of herb for the same type of ailment is always a good idea, because you're not going to know, especially if there's more than one of you, because what's going to work for you may not work for your significant other or for your children or for your grandchildren. So having 2 or 3 different types of herbs that have similar functions, I recommend it if you have the space. If you don't have the space, find the herbs that work for you and grow those. Start with those. Yes, nettle is amazing. It's why it's one of the very first, and I have a video just on nettle. So remember, people, I have a playlist. It's actually pretty long, where I break down the benefits of a whole bunch of different herbs and more. And nettle was one of the first herbs I started growing because of its many benefits. Mostly at that time, it was because, well, it's highly nutritious, very, very nutritious. So I try to add it to as many meals as I can and cook with it. But I started growing it mostly for the sake of the fact that it's very good for thyroid health. And with us going off of our thyroid medicine back then, I was trying to add as many things to our diet that I knew would nourish the thyroid and help get it working properly the way it should. And we did it with, getting rid of anything with fluoride, like not drinking the city water, because back then they fluoridated, and starting to collect our rainwater, getting rid of any Teflon pan that I had. You got to get rid of all that stuff if you're trying to heal your thyroid and you want to protect your glands up here as well. The pineal gland. Very, very hard on the pineal gland. So yeah, that's why I started growing nettle, was for the high nutrition content and for the fact that I knew it would be good for our thyroid. And so that is why it is the number one herb that goes in my mixed greens that I dry and then try to add to every dish that I can. So when it's coming in fresh, I'll try to use as much of it fresh as I can, but I'll dehydrate up a bunch and then use it throughout the year. But I throw other herbs in there too, other greens that I'm growing, even strawberry leaves, just whatever doesn't have too strong of a flavor, and I can dehydrate and throw into my food and get the nutrients from it. Anyway, love you all. Take care and God bless.